This is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. Welcome. Today we are joined by Reverend Doug Douma and Reverend Kevin Backus. Thank you for being on the program. Two ministers from the Bible Presbyterian Church. Welcome.
Good to be here with you.
Thank you.
Doug, why don't we start with you? Where are you ministering now? How did you come to the Reformed faith? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I think you had your questions on the sheet in the opposite order, so I'll take them in that order, which is...
Wow, what flexibility.
Decently and in order. That's Presbyterian, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I grew up in a conservative Lutheran church, and the short of it is I studied my way into the Reformed faith. The longer story, or slightly longer, is to mention a few names, but it's largely searching out Christian intellectuals, searching out thinkers, saying, is there a solid defense of the Christian faith? Running into a philosophy professor from University of Texas at my Lutheran church. And he gave me a syllabus, which included works of Francis Schaeffer, which I read, of course, read Calvin. But then it was particularly the work of Gordon Clark, who I wrote a biography of, that convinced me to go to a Reformed seminary rather than a Lutheran one. So that was sort of the story of how that happened. Currently pastoring a small church here in Unionville, New York, also running a ministry to the hikers on the Appalachian Trail called SOLA, Appalachian Christian Retreat. And I think you'll hear Dr. Backus, he has probably 8 or 10 hats. I've got just a few more. I'm a chaplain of a fire department here. And I was elected the assistant stated clerk at this last meeting. So that was an interesting time, and I was grateful to be involved at a more regular level during the meeting at the last Bible Presbyterian Synod. So, yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of work, but but I enjoy it. It's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun doing it.
And Dr. Backus?
Well, I came to know Christ and the Reformed faith at the same time. So I had been in a sort of a one-man ecumenical transition through churches. I had 5 fathers because of divorce, and it seemed like each one ended up in a new church. So I had the Methodist, Congregational, Lutheran, Catholic background. And at a certain point in time, long story short, I was in a special program. So early in my high school career, I was studying philosophers in a special program. So we were reading original documents, and that was the teacher's goal. So we're reading Plato and Aristotle, and we're reading the Rig Vedas, Bhagavad Gita's, we're reading through the Quran, the Old Testament, and then he wanted us to read the New Testament, and I'm reading through the New Testament. And as I'm going through there, it was, in my soul, there was an absolute conviction that this book is different from every other book. And this is the Word of God. And it didn't take long to go from there to somebody explaining to me my need of Christ and what Christ has done. And I came to know Christ in the context of a Bible Presbyterian church. The man in school who was responsible was a Calvinistic Baptist, but I ended up in the BP church, and then went on and studied from there and have become involved in the ministry. What hats? I'll leave out chaplaincy and a few other things, but along the way, the main ones are I'm the senior pastor at the Bible Presbyterian Church on Grand Island. I serve on our Presbytery Candidates and Credentials Committee and Ministerial Relations Committee in the Synod. What brings us here today probably is the fact that I chair the Interchurch Relations Committee and was for 11 years the clerk of the Synod, clerk and assistant clerk. I'm on the board of trustees and faculty of both Greenville Presbyterian Theological Seminary and Western Reformed Seminary, and also involved with PMU, which is the ministry that Reverend Douma works with. So he's one of our missionaries, and I'm the president of that organization, secretary of trustees, whenever it goes on. I'm on the board of trustees for the Association of Certified Biblical Counselors, which is a national organization with about 3,000 biblical counselors practicing the kind of counseling that Jay Adams taught us, and also was trained in conciliation work. And I'll leave it at that. That's my main bailiwick of what I do.
So both of you do a few things, and congratulations on no longer being clerk.
Yes, absolutely.
I clerk my presbytery, and I enjoy it, but it is It is something. Both of you are ministers in the Bible Presbyterian Church, as you said. So can you talk about the history of the Bible Presbyterian Church? Many in the PCA might have read, one sentence about that in their modern church history course or something, but has a rich and important history in this country. So can you provide that overview?
You want me to start on that, Doug? Yeah.
Yeah, while I've studied it, Dr. Backus has lived a good part of it, so I would defer to him on this question.
So the Bible Presbyterian Church is a continuation of the Northern Presbyterian Church. That's the general gist of who we are and where we come from. So as a Northern Presbyterian Church, dealing with the fundamentalist modernist controversy, which some people still remember, as we dealt with denomination and mission boards and others that were denying the deity of Christ, the inspiration of Scripture, the fact that Christ did miracles, that he rose from the dead, and that salvation was something that was vicarious by his work. Those kinds of things were being denied by office bearers in the church, which propelled us to come out and to form a new denomination. The new denomination that came out was called the Presbyterian Church of America. And so that was who we were in this original start. And within 2.5, 3 years of the founding of it, one of the key members of it, Dr. Machen, passed away. And when he passed away, there began to be, as there often is in these times, there began to be, well, there's these things where you're unified in, but we're going to strain and pull apart on some issues. And I would suggest that the main strain was that the Bible Presbyterians wished to continue as we had said we were, the continuation of the Northern Presbyterian Church. And in the Presbyterian Church of America, not in America, but of America, which became the OPC, in the Presbyterian Church of America, there began to be more of a courting from and acceptance of the CRC and the continental influence. And so I've been to 30 General Assemblies of the OPC over the years, more than most OP members and ministers. And as I go, there's a bit of a flavor there that comes from a continental background that's not part of the Bible Presbyterian Church. And that began to, some stress fractures began to show up along the way. One of them was we both denominations claim that historic premillennialism is welcome in our denomination. But the Bible Presbyterian, and that we have liberty in that, but the Bible Presbyterian Church was finding that churches were being challenged if they said they were a premill church. More than that, ministers who took the historic premill testimony and understanding were being given trouble and being ordained in the church. And so that was becoming an increasing issue. And I think there was a great misunderstanding. They were, things were flying back and forth on dispensationalism, and historic premill is what we were. And that was a challenge to be able to practice that. Secondly, we had issues.
I'm sorry if I could
Yeah.
interrupt you.
Yeah.
Just for some of our listeners may not, when they hear premill, they may think dispensational. Could you just briefly, I know it's eschatology, but 90 seconds. What do you mean when you say premill, historic premill?
A historic premill is the original eschatology of the Church of Jesus Christ. I'll just take that shot right up front. And I think you can historically demonstrate that. It is not a dispensational approach. It does not have multiple dispensations. It's not laying out a single timeline. It says this happens after this, after this, after this. It basically says that at a certain point in time, Christ is going to return prior to establishing the millennial kingdom. So it differs from amillennialism in saying that this is already a realized millennium that we're in, so to speak. It shares that in common with post-millennialism. And in fact, we have more in common with post-millennials than we do necessarily with amills in that area. We still believe there's promises that appertain to Israel. And then you can take a look at many historic premills, as many amills go through the book of Revelation and post-mills, and we'll have some differing interpretations as we go through the book. I take it as a chiliastic structure. The center of the book is in Revelation 11, and it parallels out from there like a wishbone going down. So that's my approach to it. And I think that's the approach that you're going to find that was at one time dominant in the Bible Presbyterian Church. We had some dispensationalists that came in. There are no longer, to my knowledge, any ministers who have any connection with or affiliate or affinity for a dispensational approach. And so they have been, that is no longer, that little bit of creeping in has been pushed back out. So that's the historical pre-mill position. And it's an accepted position. In fact, the prolocutor of the Westminster Assembly himself was an historic pre-mill. So on that, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I think as Dr. Backus noted, the beginning of the Bible Presbyterian Church is what often is noted. Having come into the denomination half dozen years ago now, I'm often updating people as to where we are today. I like something Dr. Backus told me once, that for the last 20 years, we've been very much a reformed church, and the 20 years before that, we were reforming. So it's definitely in fact, I spoke to one of our elders down in Florida, an older man who said that for many years, he only knew the term fundamentalist. And then he now knows the term reformed. And he says, yes, I am a reformed believer now. So I think that shows you something of how that history has transitioned, where it is so strongly reformed and confessional now as a church. I would submit one of the strongest confessional groups here in America. And so that's one of the things that really pulled me towards it, because maybe some of those early Bible Presbyterian distinctives I'm less influenced by or less interested in, but the place where we are now is definitely a place where I very much want to
the
be.
other one was Christian Liberty. The Northern Church was a teetotaling church. They took that official position at the time of the division. Like our major churches were in towns that the entire town was dry. So that's not our position, but there was an attempt to keep the BPC and the Presbyterian Church of America together, and that was not necessarily well received. So we ended up with the Bible Presbyterian Church General Synod. Okay. And that's how we continue today. And Doug's right. I remember being at the OPCGA one time, and their delegate who would come and visit us every year, he stood up and he made an announcement to the entire body. He said, when I go to the Bible Presbyterian Church, I find that that's where the Shorter Catechism lives. It lives in the lives of the people who are there and are committed to it. We're committed to the Reformed faith, and we're committed to the Reformed faith in such a way. I remember one year I was visiting people in 3 different cities, each day a different city, and they were all looking to come into the Bible Presbyterian Church. And as I met with them, I don't necessarily try and, push people in. So I just wanted to know, why is it, there's all these Presbyterian churches. Why is it you would seek out this little church and want to bring your church in or your ministry in with us? And if I summarize the answer from all 3, it was this: because I believe the Bible Presbyterian Church is the one that is least likely to shift doctrinally. And I believe that's true. So you have a church that is deeply committed to the Reformed faith, not just because we inherited it, but because we have worked to make that to be the case. And we're deeply committed to that. And we're not really willing to tolerate any movement away from that.
That's a superb heritage. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And Ryan, I know you had, in your notes, you had asked about the key figures, which I wanted to note briefly. Of course, we mentioned Machen and McIntyre, Buswell, also Alan McRae, one of the early guys teaching at Westminster that went over to Faith Seminary, as well as Francis Schaeffer for a time. And then getting up to more modern times, I would say Dr. Backus as well as Dr. Battle over at Western Reformed Seminary. They've been great resources for me as I study the history, as I study the doctrine of the denomination.
Yes, and the denomination has developed over the last, it would be 90 years. I don't do math. I have to take off my
88, but yeah. 88, but who's counting?
Close. Wow, that's pretty close.
Yeah.
So as you say, the center geographically of the BPC is going to be in the north,
bi-coastal.
but it is bi-coastal. Okay,
east and west.
Okay.
The group that came out in the 50s, centering around Covenant, really took most of our churches in the middle of the United States.
I see. And they formed the General Synod.
We're the General Synod. They were the Collingswood Synod that finally went into Evangelical, that became part of the RPCES, that is now in the PCA.
Right. Yes, because the Library at Covenant is named after Buswell.
Yes, it is.
I think the one at Wheaton used to be, but they changed that. Maybe trouble fixed that too. I don't know. But so you're bicoastal, and that's where Western Reformed Seminary is. Is that correct?
Puyallup, Washington, just south of Tacoma or
Okay.
Seattle.
So is that along with Greenville? Are those the two main seminaries that serve the Bible Pres?
We don't have this is one of those differences in Northern Church. We allow work to be done through agencies, not just committees of the church. So there is no official school that belongs to the Synod, but the Western Reformed Seminary is approved by the Synod every year. So if you're going to
Okay.
say what is our seminary, it would be Western Reformed Seminary.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a diversity of seminary backgrounds among the ministers. There's probably, if you look at it, probably 7 or 8 different seminaries that people have gotten their degrees from thoroughly, with additional where they've been. So it's not a denomination from one place with a kind of groupthink. I think it's really, we've really got people who've come from various backgrounds who have come to these same conclusions that we want consistently reformed, confessional, conservative, Presbyterian and biblical Bible Presbyterian church.
Yeah.
We believe in little things like God created the earth, like he says, in 6 literal consecutive days. Not always common in Presbyterian churches today. So don't plan to take an exception on that. We kind of believe the Sabbath, things like that.
Yeah, well, now let's get into the distinctives of the Bible Presbyterian Church that might distinguish, if not separate, but distinguish her from the OPC or the PCA. On polity, I think one of you corrected me that you don't use the term teaching elder; it's ministers and elders. So you're a northern, is that three office
view?
Yeah. So very similar to the OPs.
Yep.
Any other polity?
And in practice, very similar to the PCA. But let that discussion go.
Ooh, another one of those little barbs there. That's okay.
That's okay. Yeah,
we can take it. Yeah, and so and then your highest court is a synod as opposed to a general assembly. Is
right.
I remember someone from the ARP said the reason for that is they're waiting for the national church to call the general assembly, or is the BPC waiting for the national church to call an assembly, or is it just the synod fits better?
The people who were there on a certain night have passed away before I could get this in writing. But the conversation that took place at a meeting at Westminster just before the BPC was formed was a request, which I wouldn't have approved of, but it was a request to form a synod of co-affinity. In other words, we'll stay in the General Assembly, but please allow us to have a synod that has some of the distinctives, for example, historic premillennialism, so that our people can get along, be ordained, and function in the church. And those things are usually a prelude to a split anyway, so I wouldn't have voted in favor of it. But that's what was being floated, and because it wasn't accepted, we ended up having the Bible Presbyterian Church General Synod.
Yeah, and sometimes, just as with denominations, I can get along. We can do joint worship services with the OPC.
Sure.
Even though I'm very much a 2-office guy, and they are very much a 3-office denomination. I'm much more on the 2-office spectrum of the PCA. Sure. But because we state the areas where we disagree, we can work together. So sometimes those affinity synods or work as a better way than a split or a multiplication. But on in your theology, you mentioned eschatology is going to be one of the areas that may distinguish the PPC more so than others. And your commitment.
It could be, but I mean, I stood up on the platform at Synod this year to be questioned on the interchurch relations issues, and I commented to 2 people. I stuck out the moderator and the vice moderator. I said, I've always told them that we have eschatological liberty. You do realize that this historic pre-mill is standing here on the platform of our General Synod, surrounded by 2 post mills. I mean, that's the truth of it is that our presbytery is probably 50-50 for its ministers right now. And we are open.
Yeah, that's what I've reached, including in sort of looking through the numbers. I think, in our Great Lakes Presbytery, it might be more mill and post mill than historic pre-mill at this point. But there's definitely mostly pre-mill out west, probably in our Florida Presbytery as well. So the liberty that that we've spoken of in the past is there in actuality now.
Yep.
You actually meant
so
what you
that's true.
said, I see.
Yeah, it's one of those odd things, and we try to live it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then as I think you used the illustration that this is where the Shorter Catechism lives, and commitment to 6-day creationism. Any other theological distinctives that would help people understand where the Bible Pres is on the map of American Presbyterianism?
Doug, you want to take a shot at that yourself first, because you're newer to our organization?
I think we've hit up the major ones. There are ones that we noted there back in the 1930s that brought the denomination to separate, with eschatological liberty and the question of teetotalism. But as we noted now, and what drew me into the denomination, a number of other ministers in recent years, is probably that more consistent confessionalism that we ministers coming in match with the denomination and saying we are young earth creationists. We believe God created the world in 6 days. And it's I think it's frustrating for us, or we're disappointed to see denominations depart from that view, which is in the Westminster Standards, as your podcast
It
is
is. It is there.
Ryan, let me take a shot at answering it for you this way. This is going
Yeah.
to sound, I know this is going to be overly technical, so I'll just prepare you for that. But I think of it like a big beach blanket. And if you take all the Presbyterian churches across the United States and put them on a beach blanket, you're getting ready to leave the beach, and you stand up and you toss it up in there and shake it to get all the sand off of it, right? So if you did that with all the churches and they all fell back down in affinity groups, you would find that within all the major Presbyterian Reformed churches, you're going to find people that are as close to us as we are to one another. I mean, there's just really not a hair's breadth difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I teach students. I just got back from teaching down at Greenville for a week, and I have a big class. I'm with those guys, and I think, our basic commitments are the same things. And so we could talk about differences, but when I talk about the Bible Presbyterian Church, I don't try to emphasize differences.
Yeah.
Honestly, I go we're just a plain vanilla Presbyterian church.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of take the Westminster Standards, God willing, as best as we can, put those into practice, and that's what we're going to find in our congregations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've always liked as well, is just saying I'm a historic Presbyterian, right? I'm just believing what they believed before all the modernism arose in the 19th and early 20th century. And that's what we want to be, the continuing Northern Church. We're not trying to come up with anything new or be crazy. We're trying to hold to the consistent historic faith, while we so often see the world whizzing by with its, its trends coming up and down. And just, I love to see the stability in the Bible Presbyterian Church. And I think, just like Dr. Backus was noting, there's similarity and I think affinity with ministers and churches and other denominations. And there are men who have come over from the PCA or OPC into our pastoral ranks that would probably be on the more conservative side in those denominations. But I think that indicates there are plenty of other men in those denominations that would be a fit for our churches as pulpits become vacant in future years.
That's helpful. And I try to describe our congregation here as we're just vanilla Presbyterians.
Oh, really? Go good.
Yeah. And people, because vanilla gets a really bad rap because it's plain. But do you realize, and somebody else has said this better than I, but do you realize how significant it is that we have access to vanilla? Vanilla is rich and good and sweet and delightful. And that's what the Westminster Standards are. Rich, good, sweet, delightful, because they're just a summary of the Scripture. There's nothing new about them. The remarkableness, in my view, of the Westminster Standards is it's pure biblical principle and idea. Such a faithful summary. So
it's the historic Christian faith set down in a single spot for us. That's really what we've got.
Yes. And so it's hard to, well, what's your church like? Well, we're just Presbyterians.
Right.
Well, what does that mean? Well, and mainly, because the PCA is so broad. Well, we just do Presbyterian things,
Yeah.
and it sounds like that's what is the culture of the Bible Presbyterian Church now.
Hmm.
So let's about current events in the BPC. What are some of the struggles, the opportunities, the encouragements that you saw at Synod this year, or that the church is working through?
One of them I was mentioning to you, Ryan, before we started. It's just been wonderful to see a growing group of Brazilian Portuguese speaking churches in Florida. We've had some connections with Brazil for a number of years, and ministers starting churches there in these places where the population of Brazilian Portuguese speakers is surprisingly large, like hundreds of thousands in Orlando. And we plant a church and 300 people show up. I'd love for 300 people to show up here in New York, right? It's there. Those are some of the challenges. I'd say, in these Rust Belt and other places, there's demographic challenges. I asked Dr. Backus once for some advice in growing a church. He said, move to Tennessee. So that's a little more than I wanted to do at the moment, but there are those truths. The Lord is opening doors in some places and closing in others. And I've come to understand it's not usually because of the minister or because of what you're doing, but it's oftentimes larger demographic trends. So we just have to do our best to be faithful to the scriptures and to preach Christ. And we pray that there is growth of Christians within and people that find our churches as
and
well.
Ryan, along with that, when you talk about what is a challenge, so there's always like two sides to every coin. So one of the great blessings is to have a lot of growth. And one of the challenges is to have a lot of growth. And so when you talk about, the culture of the Bible Presbyterian Church, acculturating different groups to who we are and how we do things is a bit of a challenge. And now you've mentioned one group, Doug, but I'm thinking of just generally, we've been bringing in a bunch of churches along the way. And so it just takes some time for that to be the case, which is one of the reasons, we're at a shorter synod this year, but I've loved our synod time because we used to have over a weekend an opportunity to spend time together with people. And the younger ministers who would come in or newer churches would come in, would spend time with the rest of the people, and you get off and these are not things just like, here's a book, this is a book, this is BP, read this. It's more of relationships and discussions and helping people that way. It's part of our synod.
And I think others have noted as well, the same thing I've experienced is when I go to the Bible Presbyterian Synod, I'm lifted up by the sermons. I'm benefited by the fellowship with the brethren. I went to a couple of your PCA General Assemblies some years ago.
Wait a minute, they're my PCA. Wait, I'm responsible for the whole Presbyterian. Wow.
And sometimes, say you might come away and you're a little bruised, a little battered, and you've had some tough conversations. And some of those are good, but it is definitely a war or a battle at times.
I put it this way, we'll just talk about our synod for a minute. Essentially, people who come there will walk away and say it's a bit like a Bible conference, because we might have 2 or 3 sermons a day, not just a devotional. It's like a family gathering because people know each other and we'll go out together with each other and stuff. It's and when we debate issues that are that require some overtures and bills that need to be done, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how it finishes. To be honest, our kinds of discussions end up like, does it take a minister and 2 elders to be a church, or does the minister count as one of the elders? So there's your 2 elders, you got a church. We can have a 2-year study committee on that and not make a decision. But whatever way we come down, it's not like we've been debating whether or not you can be fill in the blank. You can have a different sexual identity and be a minister. Those are not our discussions. It's not whether
not that anyone's denomination on this podcast has had that.
I was going to another topic. That wasn't going to single you out.
For a number of years in recent times, we've had growth in the Bible Presbyterian Church with new churches and ministers coming in. but there's also a real consistency there. I was recently looking at old synod minutes, and I was reading in 1979, and I'm like, this is 3 years before I'm born, and I recognize half of these guys as still alive and still involved in the denomination. And I'm just, this is wild. I mean, these guys have been meeting together sometimes 45, 50, 60 or more years at synod meetings. And so when Dr. Backus says family, I mean, that's very much the case. These people know
That's
each other
wonderful.
very well. And that's one of the challenges as the denomination grows and newer people come in, is to make sure we get those other people involved. I'm always kind of looking out for, oh, there's that new church. We got a small one in North Carolina that joined, or one in Wichita that joined. And I think, oh, do they even know anybody else? So let's make sure we reach
It's
out
like
to them.
a local congregation too, that, if you have, it's just on a bigger scale. If you have new people joining, you want to get them to fit in, to assimilate it, as they say in the big churches, right? The office of assimilation. So the Bible Presbyterian highest court is a synod. The key functions of synod, I would assume, review and control. What does your synod?
Yeah, I would put fellowship at one of the top aspects of that, and then we do review the minutes of all the presbyteries and take a look at that. We receive overtures and make decisions on requests of overtures. We also occasionally pass resolutions on various topics. Along with that, we're going to be deciding any matter that's brought to the synod that requires a doctrinal decision for the whole denomination. Those are pretty rare. Usually it's like, see the Westminster Confession, move on. But and in the past, it's not true right now, but in the past we would receive property if property was given to us. But that's only happened once, when some camp property, and we've given that back to a family that was a part of that eventually. Donation at their request. And so it's been there is very little of that. We don't really own any property or have any large bank accounts. We don't have a central office. So we get together at the synod and we do our work, and we go on and continue to minister to one another, with one another.
Great.
Yeah, it's something I really appreciated too, is there's not a lot of money floating around. I was ordained in the Reformed Presbyterian Church Hanover. They actually had a rule with like no money at presbytery level, and they, I think, don't even have any committees. It was definitely a very light form of Presbyterianism. Well, the Bible Presbyterian Church has some of those things, but not nearly as much money. And I had studied years ago some of the financial challenges in the PCA at the high level, and it's just there's a lot of money, and it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. So we're able to avoid some of those
David
troubles.
Hall, one of our ministers, he ministers outside of Atlanta, has pointed out in his book on the 50th, I think it's the only book that's been published on the 50th anniversary of the PCA, but how money has taken on a life of its own in the PCA, that there's, the PCA is now $1 billion enterprise or something like that. And is that a good thing? Are there ways that we can economize? Can we use that $1 billion better? And it's a conversation you don't have to have in the Bible Presbyterian Church.
No, we really have never had a problem with saying we just have so much money we don't know what we're going to do with
it. Well, and I think the PCA, the problem is we don't know where it's going, or at least some people feel that way.
That could be a different problem.
Yeah. Yes. So, Dr. Backus, you mentioned that you have been attending the OPC General Assembly. What are and we'll get to talk about NAPARC in a moment, but what other ecumenical fellowships are maintained, fraternal relations by the Synod?
So we started with a fraternal relationship with I'm trying to remember the name of it. It doesn't exist anymore. A small group of churches, a presbytery around Philadelphia, that had broken off from us, and they joined the BPC. So they're not there anymore.
I think that
Covenant
was
Presbytery.
Covenant Presbytery.
Right, and then that was a group that had split off earlier on. I was there that day that happened, and then we went on from there and established a fraternal relationship with Reformed Presbyterian Church Hanover Presbytery, which was an early, you had some of the people who were the early assistant clerks in the PCA in its first General Assembly who had formed this other small denomination, and we had a fraternal relationship with them. One of our members from my committee will be visiting their Presbyterian meeting this year soon. And then we ended up, it took us about 18 years, but we went back and managed to develop a full fraternal relations with the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. So those two churches are full fellowship, full ecclesiastical fellowship, corresponding members with each other, receiving ministers by colloquial exams, etc., just like you would have if you had full fellowship with someone. And then on top of that, the Heritage Reformed congregations were at the second level with them, because going beyond that, you're talking about a merger, and we're not talking about that with anyone at this point, or really, to my knowledge, in the future at all. So we're not looking to do what was done in the 60s, when the Presbyterian churches and Reformed churches, I think, just got a fever that said we somehow have to vote ourselves out of existence into some new group.
Yeah.
We're not. That's not part of our DNA.
Yeah.
But I still. Oh, go ahead. What I said when I visited the OPC for the first time was, I stood up and they didn't know why I was there. Their committee did, and they got me time on the floor, which was gracious, because being a guy from the church that many of them thought killed Machen, giving me time on the floor was pretty interesting. But I said something about like this. I said, we're like the children of parents who got divorced about 50 years ago. We may never live in the same house again, but we don't have to spit and fight and attack each other. And we're here to try and stop that, and to, and then moved on to talk about behaving like brethren. And it took about 18 years, and we entered into full fraternal relationships with the OPC. We're the only church that has a memorandum of understanding with them for disaster relief. And we took that because, when a disaster would come, we don't have the ability to mount an effort, but many of our people want to help. And we didn't want to be calling up, because I would do that on occasion, like, okay, what can we do? How do we get involved helping with you? And they would go, oh, well, we're right in the middle of this right now, Kevin. So afterwards, this just says, we're treated like they're people. And that was the goal. If there's a disaster that we can help with, we don't have to explain to everybody. Like, we just call up, find out, okay, we're volunteering for fit us in where you can use us. And that's happened 3 or 4 times. But the thing that kind of brought me to tears was when we did this, the only thing that we thought about was, we're a little church, how can we come alongside and work with you? But the first time that clause got activated, I think it was Dave Knockler called me, and there was a hurricane that was going to pass right over, almost stop on our church in Cape Canaveral. And he was calling up to find out, that to tell me they were ready to come in and help us in any way we needed. That wasn't even what we were thinking about. But the relationship has been wonderful, and we continue to work with them. Although there are certainly some, just like there are differences between maybe your PCA and OPC, there's differences between the BPC and the OPC as well. But I keep telling them we're not looking to join, but we are looking to be co-laborers, brothers and sisters in Christ.
Well said. And so now, NAPARC, North American Presbyterian and Reformed Council, you've been observing, I think you said, for decades,
Yes.
an observer of NAPARC. But what prompted the desire to join NAPARC this year?
Well, I can give you kind of an overview. I started going to NAPARC in like 85 to meet with like the OPC on our relationship. But after that, and I worked with the Christian Observer, which may not be in a paper but it was the record of Southern Presbyterianism. And I was an editor with them. And between them and a local newspaper, I had press credentials. And so there I would go and I would report on NAPARC for the Christian Observer. And then I would tell what was happening back at our synod. And at some point in time, they invited us, because of the relationship we have with the OPC. The OPC recommended us, and others agreed to give us an observer status. And I remember telling our synod, like, it's just not fair. If we're going to go every year, and we are, then we ought to take the invitation to go as official observers. So we did that. But just like, don't listen to this part, okay, Ryan? But the official reason that I was given, and as a faithful servant of my synod, when they would say, why aren't you joining NAPARC? I needed to say, because the PCA is a member. And and so that was always fun. And I remember the first time they asked me to do it, I went to the president and said, I really don't want to say that and do that. He said, no, I want you to say it. And then I sat down with the PCA delegate that year, and I said, so here's where we're at. And he was already telling me, I don't think we belong here. You guys are a bunch of smaller churches here. We don't belong working with you guys. So I said, okay. So I said my piece, and that would come up occasionally. So what's changed? Well, we've been going for a good decade as observers. It's been helpful to us because of open discussions with not only OPC and HRC, but there's so many other members in there. The ARPC wants to talk to us. We've started discussions with the URCNA. We've had discussions with the RCUS, and we've been able to help at various times, like the RCUS. Their seminary is not exactly their seminary. It's something that is like an agency, but we're involved in it's a accrediting agency for Reformed Theological Seminaries Association. We were able to help some other schools with getting through that process. So there's been a bit of cooperation. We've had some good discussions to get to know each other. And at this point, when I went back and I was talking to our synod, I cited not only the benefits that would be ours by being members, the chief of which was the ability to carry on those kinds of discussions, but then also the little things like, here we are. Well, actually, before benefits, I should say this. It's our stated purpose that we are just a branch of the Universal Church, the Catholic Church, and we hold ourselves out to have fellowship with other such like branches. And then we have a statement that tells us, you might say you're in the branch, but if you're an apostate, that's not something we're going to have fellowship with. But then beyond that, with evangelical churches, there's a second clause that we talk about that we need to be very careful that fellowship doesn't mark badly the testimony for Christ. And so things like the NAE would claim to be evangelical, and they many are. But, quite honestly, and I've talked to PCA delegates who come away and said, I got out of there and felt like I needed to take a shower. Just with the stuff that goes on. So we're not going to have fellowship with them. So there were a few things particularly that would stand in the way. And we noted that there were some significant changes this year. And it's been coming, improvements. Like, I know you haven't fully dealt with the side A, side B thing completely, but you've made tremendous progress. So I've been to GRN. I talked to a lot of the guys that are involved in this work, and I see the progress that's made. I was at that General Assembly when that was first hitting the floor. I've seen the new memberships on some of your denominational committees that are solid guys that are going to make a positive difference.
There's been a massive shift over the last 5 years.
Yes, there has. A massive shift. So, I could report on what I've seen in so many of those areas. And because I work with people that are involved in this all the time. I have people on your permanent judicial commission that used to attend my college and career group. So, we're not that, we sound like we're from different worlds, but we're really not that far apart, and our lives intersect a lot. And so it was wonderful. In fact, I was just talking to Mel Duncan and thanking him for all the work that he's done. I said, this is where we're at. You've heard about the decision. I want to tell you it's because of the kind of work that you and people like you have been doing that enables us to come back and say that we can recommend this relationship. And go on. I cited your new state clerk and some of the decisions that he's made and some of the protests that he's taken, and said, this is a marked shift from your previous two state clerks.
Oh yeah,
significantly. And we go on beyond that, and could talk about the way that you had your clerks used to come and tell us at NAPARC that we have a strategic initiative of the PCA to stop working with, little churches like you, and go to work where Christ is really working, where God's really working, like in the NAE. Well, that's been set aside.
I have a video of him, of a former state clerk Chapel, actually saying that when he was trying to sell the strategic plan.
Page 26. Mean specific number 4 says this: we will partner with national and international ministries with whom we can most effectively participate in God's global mission. Try to identify those, where the Spirit is working, and get in step with that movement. We would A, seek union or appropriate levels of cooperation with reformed movements making gospel progress that are in harmony with our ethos and goals. B, we would seek to withdraw from organizations with whom we share doctrinal history, but not ministry priorities that are currently draining our ministry energies. We are at times involved with organizations that basically involved micro-denominations that have equal vote with us, and we're not able to do ministry because, though they share some of our doctrinal commitments, do not share our missional interests. And we're controlled by denominations, some that only have a few thousand members, some only a few hundred members, and yet control what we're able to do in a unified way. We need to be serious about thinking about what is the profitability, the fruitfulness of those associations.
That was part of the
Yeah.
strategic plan to
Yes.
sever fellowship with essentially NAPARC. Well, NAPARC was explicitly listed, and then complaining about we're with micro denominations, that we need to be where
True.
God is actually working. I think is what you how
Working.
you summarize that. Yeah.
I know from missionary work and speaking at a lot of churches that it's the micro denominations and the smaller rural churches in Appalachia that give you the money. So, I mean, it's interesting to think that there would be an opposition to the smaller places. I wanted to know two things real quick, just following up on the recent discussion. Because of our vote to apply to NAPARC, I assume they're going to accept us. But because of that vote was a little bit of a surprise to me. I did a lot of research reviewing the records. And to add to what Dr. Backus was saying, early on in the 1990s, it was often because of the Christian Reformed Church was a member of NAPARC. That was probably a bigger hang up than the PCA, because the Christian Reformed Church was starting to ordain women. So that really kept us apart. And then the PCA for a number of years, particularly its involvement in the NAE, was a real concern. So yeah, I too have seen the direction of the PCA improving. There's certainly concerns, and our vote at Synod was 37-5. It was pretty heavily in favor of this, which I think might be a surprise to some people. And it's interesting because of how many men we have in the BPC who have come from those other NAPARC denominations, oftentimes because of bad situations. And yet all of those men voted in favor of this relationship. So I think we can recognize this ability to work at this level through NAPARC with other Christians, despite differences that we have with them.
And so, what do you see as the big benefit to the Bible Press? I know you talk about the partnerships that you have with the OPC and with Heritage Reform, which that's the denomination of which Joel Beakey is a part. People may recognize that name more than Heritage. So, do you see this more than iron sharpening iron, or?
Well, that's certainly a part of it. So part of if you've ever been to a NAPARC meeting, part of what takes place now, really two main issues. They have some topics you're going to discuss, but the big things are, number one, every denomination is going to give a report. And so if you want to find out what's happening in all of those 13 denominations real quickly, this is one of the best ways to do it. Secondly, they change your format. So there's more room for what we call bilateral meetings. In other words, two denominations can reserve this room at this time to sit down and have a meeting. The Bible Presbyterian Church is small. We've already said that. We also have a smaller budget. And it helps me a lot to be able to go to one place and meet with 4 denominations than to have to fly to 4 different places to have those meetings.
Yeah.
Now, we'll probably still go to Heritage and we'll probably still go to OPC, but we are going to be able to do that. So we get to know what's going on. We get to meet with others. We can work on various relationships with them. And then there are cooperations that are helpful. I've already mentioned our diaconal cooperation, and that can go beyond where we're at right now if there's more need for that with other organizations. Little things, we're not on the congregation finder list for NAPARC, and people assume when they go there that if we're not there, that we're not Reformed churches. So if they see us there, that would be helpful. Beyond that, I think of the fact that it allows us to have, where possible, a united testimony before the world on a number of important issues, which I think is also significant. And then there are consultations. So for years, we've been involved with the missions and diaconal consultation. And most people, even in NAPARC, don't know that happens. But once a year, it's going to come up in a couple of weeks in September, the PMU people are going to go representing the BPC, and others will be there from the OPC and the PCA and the ARPs are usually there, and start to get in a few other groups, and we begin to sit down and talk about issues that are affecting us as missions organizations around the world. And also it helps, like, my work was largely in Myanmar when the borders were open. Well, somebody else may be there, and so another person may come across and be saying, like, we're doing a work there, and nobody knows about it. And like, we don't really need to produce the 5th translation of the shorter catechism in Chin. We can use the other 3 and put our time and money in something else. It's helpful that way. So, and there's a number of consultations like that, theological education, and other work, and that's something that we wouldn't be a part of if we're not really being members in NAPARC.
Yeah, and one other thing that was noted at Synod, and it's despite we are the BPC, and some, we think we're the best Presbyterian church. Try not to be too haughty. we do think that we will have a benefit on NAPARC, that as one of now 14 denominations, that we will have a voice there. That for our size is impressive, that we can be one of 14 when we're just a small denomination, and that I believe that there's a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge and benefit that can come from the Bible Presbyterian Church to the other denominations. So that's encouraging as well.
I told our synod, and I told a couple of guys from the PCA last week, I said our goal would be in this is that we would like to talk to you about issues and not just about you. And NAPARC gives us an opportunity to know what's happening and then to be able to talk to them. And I think if you would go back and get a track record of my fraternal remarks to the OPC over the years, that unlike some, most fraternal addresses are kind, friendly. We all tell you, like, you're a great group, you're doing a good job, keep up the good work. But every once in a while, the Bible Presbyterian come in and say, here's an issue that's hurting you around the globe. We're defending that too for you, but please work on fixing this. Or here's a decision you are about to discuss. We would like to give you our opinion on how you should address that. And so, we're not simply going to say, hey, glad to be here, everything's fine.
That's a waste of time.
It is, but it's what some people want. And at the same time, I believe that we're willing to hear that from others. I don't think that the Bible Presbyterian Church, even though we think we're doing well with the catechism and the Reformed faith, etc., I can take a look, and somebody from the outside could go, you got a little challenge in that presbytery or with those congregations. And I go, yeah, we got to work on that. So we're open to that kind of communication as well.
And I know in the PCA, not to make this all about the PCA, but we are the largest member of NAPARC. But when we were dealing with some of that, the sodomite affection, ministers who loved, who lusted after men, a number of our NAPARC denominations who were in fraternal relations with us on the floor of the General Assembly warned us, pled with us, you have to deal with us. You cannot allow this to fester. And I think that's one of the benefits of fraternal relations. So do you think that, assuming you're received in an NAPARC, do you think you might consider corresponding or someday fraternal relations with the PCA?
I'm certain that could be quite possible. Whether we have fraternal relations or I believe the PCA just generally opens an invitation to any member of NAPARC at times to do that. So I've had people tell me that they would like to see that happen who are in the PCA.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about, or you alluded to it earlier. How do you assess the health of the PCA? You've had dealings with, I guess, 2 of our previous stated clerks, and our current stated clerk for SJC judge. She's joined with some very important dissents. And what we've seen since the issue of a sodomite minister, all of our I think all of the moderators of General Assembly have been men who either signed that dissent with ruling Elder Dowling, or in this last case with Kevin DeYoung, was speaking on concupiscence and
Yep.
and helping us to remember what that word means, which most of us hadn't encountered since our seminary days. So I don't know if correlation is any indication, but there certainly has been a change. Would you agree?
Yes. And that's what I presented to our synod, that we can see. I mean, I didn't get into, tremendous detail,
Right.
but we can see it taking place, and we'd like to encourage it along the way. That's partly what I mean by be able to speak to rather than just speak about your church.
Yeah.
And not that we've got every single answer and we do everything better than anybody else. One of those first statements for us, probably as I think even for you, is there's no perfect church under heaven. And that's not something that I say lightly. I don't walk into NAPARC thinking we've got all the answers and we're here to straighten you out. I walk in and think, we're a little brother or a little sister who has been part of this work for a long time. You've learned many things. We've learned many things. And together we want to continue to bring glory to God and expand his kingdom. We've got our little contributions in our world. For example, BPs are really willing to go to little places where it's a country area, it's fairly remote, and try and build a church for people who've been hungering and thirsting after the word of God. And let's be honest, the PCA generally, when they're looking to plant a church, it's not in an area that's an hour from a major population center.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention something similar. I was trying to figure out a good way to say it, as Dr. Backus is saying. I lived in the South, a couple places, Texas and in North Carolina. And the more remote you go, the more Baptist the churches are. And the more suburban you go, the more you find your PCA churches. So there was concern there, even from my fellow pastor down there, a former PCA man, that the PCA was planting in, say, suburban or wealthier places. But I'm glad that the Bible Presbyterian Church, we have some older churches that are in small or out of the way places. I mean, there's really no, we've mentioned this before in conversation Dr. Backus has, there's no stepping up to this great church in another place, right? You're each where you are. It's probably a life sentence where you're called to. But yeah, exactly, a privilege and a wonderful thing that we're not using rural churches as stepping stones to bigger places, but we are planting in rural. I think the best example is our church in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. This is Boundary County. It's bounded by Washington, Montana, Canada, and the rest of Idaho. You can't get more remote in the continental U.S. and the 48 states. And we've planted a church there that is just thriving by the grace of God. It's just a wonderful church. And I think it's sort of one that would be unlikely. I think the OPC said no to it. And I think the PCA probably never even considered it because of its location.
We're planting a church in southeastern rural Ohio right now as well. So, yeah, I think you're going to find that's the case, that number one, that we're willing to go into some places that aren't going to produce the mega church in a beltway. But the flip side of that is, as well, is that you have people who are committed to being with churches. I would never say it, no offense, Doug, but I've never said it the way Doug did. You're sentenced someplace. I'm starting my 44th year in pastoral ministry at the church on Grand Island. I've had many opportunities to go somewhere else. I love the people here. I came to know Christ here years ago. This is where I want to be. 44th year. And I tell new guys coming in, I said, the Bible Presbyterian Church is sort of like this. You get some ministers standing around, and, the gossip might go a little bit like this. Somebody will lower their voice and go, he's on his second church. It's almost like you're saying he's on his second wife. I mean, there's no real aspersion to that, but it's just that people tend to go places and stay and minister and build up the people of God in that place.
Wow. Well, looking ahead, and you alluded to this earlier,
Yeah, I think it's
do you
important.
anticipate in the next millennium, just as in the middle, you said it started in the 60s, but came to fruition in the 80s with the PCA and the RPCES, sort of a effort at merger, joining and receiving is what we called in the PCA. Do you
Yep.
see that in the next millennium as much
No.
as you can? No.
No. I can see only two churches that are, giving that serious consideration right now, and that would be the Heritage Reformed and Free Reformed churches. They hold their synods at the same time. They're both part of the work at Puritan Reformed Seminary, and so I think those are the only two that have those kinds of discussions, and even they're not pushing that right now. There are a number. There's at least three denominations I know of in there, and if we're accepted, we'd be the fourth that would say, we're coming. I know what your statement says. We are not interested in organic union with anyone. So the two Korean churches aren't. The RCUS official position is not. Many of us have a position where we'll say that we believe that what John is talking about, John 17, other places, is that we have union. We have organic union in Christ, and it doesn't require organizational union to have organic union. But this is not a quick done process. Just so you know, I think people probably don't know the process of joining NAPARC. We
Yeah.
have to vote as a synod to do that, and now we've communicated that to the secretary. Now that has to be in order to actually file an application. We have to have the sponsorship of two highest assemblies. So even before we put the application in, Heritage Reform gave us one. The CEIR of the OPC, I believe, is going to recommend us for another. We may talk to a couple others. Once you have the two, you put the application in. If they vote to do that at that point, they send it at the next meeting, they send that out to all of the member churches. And there has to be time for all of the member churches to vote yes or no on our application. And that would require a 2/3 vote. And since some of those highest assemblies only meet every 3 years, you have 3 years for that to accomplish. So, I'm hoping I'm alive at the time that this actually comes to an end and it's accepted. And, maybe after some of the things that we said back and forth today, the PCA will vote no on our application. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's no desire really in the Bible Presbyterian Church, especially with the our view on creation and our holding to the standards as we do. It'd be hard to find another group that would be a candidate for any type of merger. Those Reformed churches that Dr. Backus mentioned are wonderful, but they're three forms of unity. So when you're on the Westminster side, merging and changing standards would be very, very difficult. So I think the church in general is very happy where we are. And Dr. Backus mentioned something earlier about churches in the past voting themselves out of existence. This was Gordon Clark's critique, who I wrote about. His paper was called "The Proposal to Abolish the RPCES," when the joining and receiving happened. And it was quite fascinating because he actually wanted the OPC to be involved as well, despite his problems there in the OPC. So I think, that question of working with other churches is a complicated question. And I feel like this is the right level for us, and probably for all until the Lord comes back, till the Lord returns, being in NAPARC, but not merging with another denomination, I feel is the best place for the BPC.
And as we talked about earlier, sometimes being apart without that organic unity, but still getting together and working where you can actually promotes unity and efficiency. And is it Carl Trueman who made the point that Presbyterianism until America has always existed in very small geographic situations? And there have been people who have asked the question about the PCA. It's so large and so geographically disparate that perhaps part of our trouble is it's just too big to work. What are your thoughts on that, as far as in light of this lack of desire for organic unity?
I prefer that's an internal decision for the PCA to have a discussion about. I don't want, we're not joining to come and tell you the best way to run your own denomination any more than we want you telling us how to take care of some of those things in ours. So.
That's right.
my only thought is that's why you have presbyteries, right?
Yeah.
Each local group of presbyteries can hopefully work towards the encouragement of one another and reforming.
Yeah.
As they
Well, how do you
go.
perceive the health of the Reformed Church, broadly speaking, in this country? It seems like there's a greater interest in confessional Christianity. Have you found that to be the case?
I think there's a greater interest in Calvinism. There's a greater interest in the Reformed faith in general. There is an interest in Presbyterianism, but mostly the Reformed faith. And just leave it, not necessarily of the Presbyterian stripe. And that depends where you're at. I mean, look, I just spent a week in Greenville. You can't throw a stone without hitting a Presbyterian church. But that's a unique area.
Yes.
It's not that way in a lot of places. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I've had people come to our church as well that are Reformed Baptists.
Whoa. We
probably
don't use that
counted up.
language. This is a family show.
He means soteriologically Calvinistic Baptist is what he meant to say.
Yes, sorry.
You have to bleep that out.
Calvinistic-ish Baptists. And probably there are more of them than there are Presbyterians, right? We're ultimately very small. And I'm sitting here in a church that's 200 years old as of this year. And when I look back through the history of our church, I could say, the Reformed faith is in a really bad state. There were Presbyterian churches in every town here in New York that were full. And now half of them have fallen in and the others are tiny. But yet there has been, I think, a good resurgence of the Reformed faith in recent years. I've written about this some, noting that I think Ligonier played a big factor. Maybe Francis Schaeffer, various others did as well. And so I actually, as you had noted that question, I had published some of Dr. Clark's letters, and he in 1983 wrote a book on the confession called "What Do Presbyterians Believe?" And someone complimented him, and he said, "Thank you for your compliment on what do Presbyterians believe. Only there hardly are any Presbyterians." So this nadir back in 1983 or in the mid 20th century was a difficult time. And I think now, because of the work of so many of those wonderful characters that we love in the Reformed faith, even in our times, because of their work, there has been a resurgence. I would love it to be a resurgence that brings people into the churches, though, because I'm always encouraging online internet theologian friends of mine to get into church. It's one thing to be a fan of Reformed theology, but that's not church. And that's a real big
Well, gentlemen,
problem.
this has been a wonderful time. I'm being called to go to another meeting, so I'm going to have to thank you for the time and look forward to future fellowship together. Lord bless.
Well, Pastor Kevin Backus and Doug Douma, thank you for
you
your time.
All right. Bye now.
Appreciate it. All right. God bless.
It was great to meet you, Doug. Thank you. Thanks for joining the conversation on the Westminster Standard, which is the podcast of Jude 3. For more information or to support our work at promoting confessional renewal within the Presbyterian Church in America, please visit our website, jude3pca.org. Join us again next time. I'll talk to you then.